Evolutionary.org, Hardcore 2.0, episode 93 coming your way. So we're talking about Clenbuterol versus Anavar for fat burning, complements of Euro Pharma. So Mobster and I, we're going to go over fat burning 101. We're going to give our thoughts on fat burning to start off. A lot of things we can talk about. We've talked about fat burning in the past. It's definitely an issue. A lot of people are looking to burn fat on their cycles these days. And we're going to give our thoughts on that. We're going to talk about Euro Pharma clenbuterol facts. We're going to go over what they have available and what clenbuterol is all about. A lot of people don't understand what clen is. They think it's a steroid. They think it's a this. They think it's that. We're going to kind of separate the fact from fiction and tell you facts about it. We're also going to talk about Euro Pharma Anavar. We're going to give you the facts behind Anavar, give you some history behind it, some of the history when it comes to using Anavar over time, how it got taken away from bodybuilders and how it made a comeback. We're talking about fat burning stack options. So you can put together a fat burning stack option through Euro Pharma and get really good results with your fat burning. And then we're going to talk about Euro Pharma, final thoughts on Euro Pharma, why we trust Euro Pharma, why it's Mobster is one of Mobster's favorite brands. So let's first talk about fat burning 101, Mobster. I'm going to let you get the floor on this one to start.
Right, so it's a bit of a misnomer, really, Steve, when we talk about fat burning as such, because what we really mean, when people say fat burning, like it's a particular thing, and what they really mean is that there's two kind of aspects to it. One is literally you're looking to lose fat. You're not looking to burn fat per se. You're looking to get leaner. That's really what we're talking about. I don't think you'd care if it sort of took a pill and you shit it out one night, Steve. People don't care how necessarily it disappears, but obviously the process in reality is that two-stage approach. Is I want to look leaner, I want to have less body fat on myself, I want to see more visible muscles, I want a six-pack. Now the issue, of course, then comes down to what you're doing about it. We see sometimes, and I'm going to sound like I'm being a bit negative here, sometimes on the forums, people will come on and say, what PEDs, what supplements can I take to burn fat? And I read the whole of the post and I'm like, okay, I'm not seeing cardio and diet being mentioned. So straight away we get into, right, when your approach is kind of a little bit skew-if. You might have, in the same way that you can train or not train, so they say accurately, and take anabolic steroids, and the actual science says you may well add muscle. So there's an argument to be made for just taking Clen, just taking Anavar, doing no cardio, no diet, and perhaps seeing a small percentage of fat loss. But the reality of the situation is thus, and it's kind of that bigger picture type thing. If you are on point with your cardio, with your physical activity, if you are on point with your diet, and then you come onto the forums and you say, can you help me take it another stage further, then we're way more likely to be able to help you. Now, there's a few things in top here, Steve, and I'd argue that it actually applies in principle to building muscle. You need to take ownership of the habits that you might have. If you, and we see this happen actually, Steve, and I think, again, it's one of those elements of being more successful. If you come on and say, realistically, this is the percentage of body fat, this is how much fat I am, this is how out of condition I am, and I put my hands up and I say that I'm responsible for it, then we know that we're going to have a more likely degree of success with you than someone who says, oh, I'm this percentage of body fat, and we see the photographs and we know it's 5 or 10% worse. Or they want to eat ready meals, they want to carry on going out to restaurants, and we know that the success with forum members is always going to be better when they meal prep. It's all going to be better when they do their cardio. I'm a very busy guy. Motherfucker, we're all fucking busy. And yet there's a ton of stuff with people that are way too much time on their phones. And I say, get off your phone, get up 15 minutes early, go out for a 15-minute walk, go out for a 20-minute walk, meal prep, and do all these particular things, right? So there's lots of different aspects to it. The other issue, and I think something that Steve's expanded on in the past, and when at the beginning of the show, he kind of hinted at this a little bit, is that the reality of the situation is the percentage of people that want to lose fat, get lean, is way bigger than those people that want to peak on their bicep or a bigger chest, Steve. It's way bigger. It's so common, it's unbelievable. the number of fat type diet associations and organizations, the number of people that are eating crappy food, the number of people that are having takeouts, the number of people that don't do cardio and exercise. Let me give you an analogy. It's actually a statistical one. And this comes from both American and United Kingdom, where I live in Wales, census. And every census that I can recall for the last 20, 30 years, Steve, every 10 years in this country, pretty much ask the same question, same one that your doctor will ask, someone your insurance company might ask in America, Steve, and that is how much exercise you get on a regular basis. And unfortunately, it's not enough people are answering this question. And it comes down to, I believe, is about 30% of most people, when asked, 30% will say something like, I think the question is normally along the lines of 20 minutes, 3 times a week. In other words, 1 hour in total of actual exercise. And what they really mean, Steve, is walking, running, taking the kids to the park, etc. What they're not really talking about is jogging 5K, hitting the gym, and so on and so forth. Now, that's not to say that I want to be tripping over joggers when I go to the shops of an evening or whatever, but realistically, most people aren't exercising. Obesity crisis in America and the United Kingdom is horrendously bad. Medical insurance, etc., in the States will be going up. And there's kind of an argument for and against in terms of people will say, well, they're not being educated, but you've just got to read the labels. You've just got to take responsibility. You don't have to eat the shit in the supermarket because it's easy to eat the shit in the supermarket, and so on and so forth. And if you do those things, if you take ownership of what you're doing, the success is going to be that much better. Just literally small lifestyle changes will fix most people. Type 2 diabetes in the UK, Steve, is pretty much fixed with diet and lifestyle changes. It doesn't require medication in a great deal of cases. Close to 90-95% can be fixed with those two things. But if we're talking about the sort of more hardcore audience, we're going to say that our audience is probably going to be made up of people that do train to some degree, certainly hitting the gym 3 times a week, kind of know a little bit about diet, nutrition, and macros, and so on and so forth, are on the forums and do listen to this show on a regular basis. You're looking for a bit more of an edge. So we're going to assume, but make sure that you are doing these things, that you are hitting the gym 40, 50 minutes, 3 times a week. You do out and use an app on your phone, whatever, to count how many steps you're doing. And you're kind of becoming more aware on a regular basis, both by listening to the shows and a little bit of education on just what it means to have a better diet. Talk about the obesity crisis, Stephen, and of course, the more focused approach that our listeners would have to the idea of getting lean, above and beyond what may be considered normal in the Joe public.
Yeah, it's a little weird in America, buddy, because it depends where you're living. Certain parts of the country, the obesity epidemic is really bad. Other parts, people stay in better shape. So it really depends. Like if you go to California, I can take California as a state. There's parts of California where people are in great shape. Everyone's lean. Everyone's muscular. People take really good care of themselves. There's parts of California where people don't. So it just depends on where you're at. And a lot of people, I've seen this with people, they're like, oh, what obesity epidemic? We don't have an obesity epidemic. Well, because you are living in a place that doesn't. And then other people are like, wow, everybody's fat because you're living in a place where everybody's fat. So it really depends on where you're living. But what have we found with the people in the parts of America that are more obese versus parts of America like the beaches near in Southern California like San Diego, LA, Malibu, those places, or San Francisco, where people are in great shape. A lot of that has to do with the educational gap. A lot of that has to do with the financial gap. And that's the ironic thing. The poorer you are, the more fat you are. Like the poorest states in America and the poorest cities are the most fat. And the wealthier parts of America are people in the better shape. So it really boils down to Mobster. It's not about going out there and exercising and going out there and doing this or doing that. It's about educating yourself on what you're putting into your body, educating yourself on how to exercise and going that direction. So this is what we do on this podcast. We aim to educate people. Those of you who listen to this podcast are going to be more educated than people who don't on this subject. So that's what we want to do. So let me educate you on the way the body works. So one of the big reasons why we have an obesity epidemic is when you look at a person who's overweight, they are storing fat more
Yeah.
than they're burning fat. So how do we knock you out from storing more fat to burning more fat? Well, it can start different ways. It's about a big reason for that is insulin. And when insulin is kept elevated throughout the day, you're going to be in fat store mode. Insulin is a very anabolic hormone, and anabolic means big, so the more often you're eating and the more food you're eating and the different types of foods that you're eating that are spiking your insulin to really, really high levels, your body's going to obviously store food to be used as energy at a later date. So one of the first things you can do is look at how often am I eating, how much am I eating, and what kinds of foods I'm eating, and look at
Yeah.
that and clean that up. So it's very important to know what's going on in your body. If you're eating fast food, restaurant food, takeout, all the stuff, you're ordering pizza, you're ordering food to your house, then I can assure you that you're eating the wrong foods, because those are the foods that are going to be full of crap, fillers, additives, and all this stuff, which tell your body to store fat. So you want to be
Yeah.
telling your body to,
Honestly, just for a second, sorry, just want to jump in for a second here. One of the things that Steve and I have discussed on multiple shows and hinted at on multiple shows, and especially on the forums, is the quote unquote, if it fits your macros. So the idea, if it fits your macros approach, is that it doesn't matter what the food is, so long as the fat, the carbohydrate, the protein, the breakdown of the macros is sufficient. There's enough protein in here to build muscle. There's enough carbohydrate to fuel the energy that I require. There's enough fat in here to keep my joints lubricated and give me a little bit of fat storage for stored energy. Okay. And then I've used the analogy of Dex Jackson, the 2008 Mr. Olympia, saying, listen, I've probably got the best genetics on the planet to get into shape. And yet, when it came to me getting into shape, I didn't use the if it fits your macros approach. With my great genetics, I still ate lean cuts of meat. I still ate healthy fish. I still had healthy vegetables. And what Steve said is true. If I had an identical twin, Steve, and I was the kind of person that posted on the forums beautiful, homemade, meal prepped food made from organic materials, all sourced locally, and I made sure that my protein and my carb and my fat was all on point. And my twin did it if it fits your macros approach and went to the supermarket and brought ready meals and by a combination of factors managed to get the protein and the carbohydrates and the fats are the same as mine, hit the gym the same as me, but he was taking the ready meals and junk food approach and sauces approach or whatever else, and I was the motherfucker that was on point. The argument becomes that my results would be better. So definitely there's a degree of truth there. I think the other thing sometimes when it comes to getting into shape, Steve, and we've seen this with literally married couples that have been put into the lab setting, where one of the couples is almost like that sort of a rhyme. One eats no fat and is incredibly lean, and one is obese. And it tends to be that the obese underestimated the physical activity that they thought they were doing, and also didn't think they were eating that badly. And the underweight, lean person was underestimating the levels of activities. They actually thought they were doing less than they were doing, but they were quite fidgety. And they weren't eating the crap that they thought that they were eating. And so this has literally been in a closed room experiments they've proven time and time again. So one of the things that people sometimes do is they won't even admit to themselves when they're eating crap. And a classic example might be someone that eats quite well, clean, all day long, and then sits down of an evening and it's a family-sized bag of chips, as you say in America, crisp, what we call in the UK, and will consume the whole goddamn motherfucking bag, 1,500, 1,600, 2,000 calories, while they're watching TV, while they're sitting with their family of an evening, and not even realize that they're doing it. So one of, for example, key points that I've done even in the past, and I'm sure Steve's done this with clients, is one of the things we sometimes do, especially with a new client, is we get someone to say, write down every single thing that you eat. And I mean everything, from the time you get up to the time you go to bed. And then literally they start to see for themselves what they've done. And then I can pick out and change foods. And sometimes, Steve, it's just been literally changing what they're eating The calories going in and the protein and the macros has been kind of, well, that's the same. But once you swap out junk food for fruit and fries for vegetables, they almost automatically start to realize how they feel better, and they start to monitor their activities more and so on and so forth. They're almost doing it for themselves, Steve. You and I have barely done anything. So there's definitely an issue there. And I think another thing which is worth saying about the obesity crisis specifically is the impact on your health. The argument again becomes, and I agree with Steve, that the listeners to these shows is not someone that wants to remain obese. They're listening to the show because they want to get lean. And the rest of the listeners are just looking that they've already got a little bit of muscle, they're already training, Steve, but obviously want to get better. So the obesity crisis, the final thought on that particular thing is, Steve, is it impacts overall on your health. And I'll give you a simple cost. A few years ago, the cost of a operation on your heart here in the United Kingdom was estimated with the NHS for a relatively straightforward operation. It cost about £55,000. I'm going to say that's about 70,000 US at the minute, at the rate of exchange we got as we do this show. And this is on an average individual with heart issues having a heart operation. If the person was obese, it was another £20,000-30,000. So that's about another $40,000, because the complications from being obese, the time recovering after the operation, literally a longer operation taking place, and more medication, etc., and rehab was required, and the risk factor was that much higher. So literally being out of shape, being fat, and this is not just for the heart issues, it's for multiple issues, is that much more costly. And of course, in America especially, which is the majority of our listeners, it means your insurance premiums, to what the cost of your medical insurance is going to be that much higher. So it makes sense to be in better shape and so on and so forth. And ultimately, of course, and this definitely applies to our listeners, it looks better. You're going to look better. And the younger listeners especially will understand the idea of having a six-pack. And as we say here in the UK, Steve, pulling. That's male or female. You will attract better mates. You will feel better in yourself. And certainly the degree of confidence that comes from looking in good shape, whether me being a big, strong motherfucker, or Steve with a 4-pack, 6-pack, and having veins and having a certain particular shape, or our listeners going, I feel good, I look good, the way that I walk, the way that I carry myself is with a greater degree of confidence coming from being lean. So we understand what the mental process is. But yeah, all the information we're trying to give you, certainly in terms of this approach, applies to the full spectrum, from the morbidly obese to I just want a 6-pack and have a better looking girlfriend or better looking boyfriend, or just be the person amongst my group of peers who looks fucking amazing. So there's a little bit of information, hopefully, for every single person. And we're going to try and cover some of those approaches in our response to you today. Back to you, Steve.
So let's get into cardio when it comes to fat burning 101. And that ties into the Clenbuterol that we're going to talk about and the Anavar we're going to talk about. So when it comes to cardio, there's an optimal way to do it where you want to get the best results for fat burning. So fasted cardio, that's a huge weapon. And the reason is because it forces your body to go after stored energy. And that's your fat store. So when you see an obese person, they're storing a lot of fat. That's energy that the body is conserving to be used at a later time. Now, a lot of times what happens, they never get an opportunity to use it because they end up croaking from a heart attack or some other obesity related disease. So we want to definitely, train the body to get rid of that excess fat. And listen, it's going to be uncomfortable at first. I get it. A lot of you are going to be or a friend of yours or your cousin or something who wants to lose fat. Look, they're going to have a hard time at first doing fasted cardio because they're used to using food as energy. So they'll wake up, have a big breakfast, then go work out because we've been told that, food gives energy, food does this, food does that. But here's the bottom line is that your body has mechanisms in place. One of the mechanisms is that stored fat that you're carrying, that extra tire that you're carrying, right? Unless you're 2% body fat, everybody's carrying excess fat that's our body's itching to be used for energy. So to go after those fat stores, you've got to give your body a reason to go after his fat store. So look, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're probably addicted to sugar and carbs. you're you know, you're it's a habitual thing. You're used to eating before workout, whatever it happens to be. But I can tell you, as someone who used to do endurance sports, triathlons and half marathons and all that stuff, people didn't go and eat before their races. Maybe they'll have like a banana like 3 hours. They'll wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. and get start warming up and stuff for their race. Maybe they'll have a banana or something, but most people will have nothing, right? And most people won't carb up the day before, all this other nonsense. Really, it works against you, the carb up, because now you're going to be heavy the next day, right? You're going to need a big bowel movement. So what you want to do is you want to evacuate as much as you can. The best triathletes that I used to train with, that's what they would do. They'd have 2 evacuations that morning, and they'd urinate as much as they can to get as much waste out of their body. You don't want to put something in your body. You want to expel as much as you can. That's the trick. So that's what you want to do. So don't worry, you're not going to like pass out, you're not going to die if you don't have a meal before your cardio. So you need to get away from that. And then pre-workouts and these pre supplements, protein powder, all this shit. Don't take anything. Just drink some water and go do your fucking cardio so that you can train your body. Now it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks for you to adjust. The first 2 3 weeks will probably be uncomfortable, but after that it'll be
Yes.
easy, and then you'll be fine. Now you'll switch your body. That light will switch where you'll go from being insulin resistant to insulin sensitive, and you'll notice that you don't get those cravings and you don't have those problems anymore. So it's very, very important to kind of train your body. That's what we're trying to do. And look, Clenbuterol and Anavar, adding them on top of it will allow your body to actually burn more fat. Okay, so you'll get more results, double the results, triple the results. And we're going to talk about these two compounds here in a second. Anything you want to add, Monster, before we move on?
Yes, Dave. I mean, the body is incredibly adaptive, and I completely understand. I'm just thinking back to when I very first started jogging, Steve, the very first time. I could barely run around the block of flats, the apartments where my mum still lives now. And yet, within a very relatively short period of time, 6 months to a year, I ended up doing 10Ks. I think I went from running around my mum's block of flats and hanging out my arse, as we say here, bringing up phlegm that probably been in my lungs for 10 years, to being able to run around the whole uh, estate with the block of flats, multiple blocks of flats on it, and running around the local village through the town, the part of London where I lived, and then eventually worked up to being able to run central London, the 10K. So your body's incredibly adaptive. The first few times you do fasted cardio, you're going to be, oh my God, whose bright idea was this? Stevesmi line, it's fucking horrendous. I'm also thinking about the food thing that Steve talks about. I remember Jay Cutler on one of his videos, Steve talks about having at least 3 meals, sometimes 4 meals. And he would train late in the day, sometimes in the early part of the evening, sometimes doing his cardio at 3 o'clock in the morning because of the heat in Vegas, where he'd moved to at that particular point in his career, where he still lives now. And yet, ironically, Steve, I just trained legs this morning. And I sometimes, to remind people that the food you had last night is as important as the meal you have in the morning. I went to the gym this morning, I trained legs. What was my fuel? It was some sort of muesli or granola, or some kind of granola that I had. That's it. So I'm in the gym doing 700-pound fucking squats and 1,500-pound fucking leg presses on a bowl of granola. You know, your body will adapt. And the other thing I think is worth mentioning, it occurred to me as you were talking, Steve, is time. Okay. If you're properly fat, if you're properly obese, and again, I'm going to assume that the majority of the listeners have already made some steps towards getting into shape. You're looking for an edge when you come to listen to this show. It takes a certain period of time. Adding muscle, serious muscle, is the same process. You can add relatively small amounts of muscle quite quickly, especially at the beginning, and you will lose a little bit of fat quite quickly right at the beginning. But getting down 20 pounds of body fat, adding 10, 15 pounds of muscle is a longer process. So although what we're going to talk about today is going to aid your journey, the cardio and the fat that I've already talked about is super important. The lifestyle changes are super important. Making sure that you're consistent in the gym is super important. And then we're going to give you an edge as well. But do not get too frustrated if the bigger body weight losses take a little bit more time. Your body will hate you doing fasted cardio and then very quickly will adapt to it for weeks. Like Steve said, the 20 pounds of fat loss will take a lot longer than the first 2 or 3 pounds, which will probably fall off you literally the first few weeks of fasted cardio. But the longer fat loss takes a bit of time. It took you your body typically quite a while to get out of shape. It is not an instantaneous process. And key here, of course, Steve, whether it's muscle gains or fat loss, is keeping the fat off, keeping the muscle that you've added on. So it's again, I think you need to have a little bit of an element of I will need to continue to do certain things and keep certain changes in place long term. I prefer sometimes, Steve, to get people's head around less the idea of diets and more of the idea of lifestyle changes. If diet seems to me sometimes to have that connotation of a short period of time, I'm going to diet for 16 weeks, I'm going to diet for 12 weeks. No, how about lifestyle changes, things that you're going to do for years? Don't forget, it takes you a long time to get out of shape, takes you a long time to get very, really strong, takes you a long time to get really, really big muscles. It needs to be a longer process. There will be things we can do, and especially today with Clen and with Anavar, which will help in the short term, but get your brain around the long-term lifestyle changes, way of thinking, and your journey will be that much easier, and your mindset will be that much more controllable. And certainly the effects on your body, as I said, what the body does and adapts to. Something very quickly to finish, Steve, that you and I have talked about before is the nature argument. When Steve and I talk about evolution and what your body does, and the great reason for us storing body fat comes down to two factors. One is the energy that we require, because it was always feast or famine when we first existed as human beings. There was not a consistent supply of food. Sometimes there was a lot, sometimes there was nothing. And so our body got into the habit of storing fat and or fuel, sometimes even in the form of muscle, because it didn't know when the next meal was coming from, and it needed to be able to cope with those mechanisms. And the other one, of course, is the periods of the time of year, the seasons, Steve. So it is perfectly normal, even for the most ripped amongst us, to have a little bit of body fat in the winter time just to protect our organs and keep us alive. And again, the lack of food, but mostly about keeping us alive in terms of body temperature, and obviously be that little bit leaner in the summertime. And stuff we've touched upon on other shows, Steve. We said it's always going to be that much easier to diet and get in shape in the summertime, and that much easier to bulk in the winter time. So you can work at those things. If you are the kind of hardcore motherfucker that stays ripped all year round, well, goddamn, motherfucker, you are definitely hardcore. Same thing if you was had a lot of body fat all year round just to be a big strong beast or something like that. It's that little bit more difficult to do that in the summertime and with the heat, etc., and especially in certain places
Yeah.
in the state we get crazy hot. Back to you.
Yep. So let's move on to clenbuterol facts. So Euro Pharma, they do sell clenbuterol. And look, clenbuterol right off the bat, it is not a steroid. I think a lot of people back in the 90s and 2000s, when I first started going onto forums, they would actually argue this, mobster. They'd say, oh, Clen is a steroid. I'm like, no, it's not. But they would argue it. Back in those days, that's how it was. If you were a bully on a forum, you could bully your viewpoint on anybody, even
Yeah.
if it was a lie. So look, it's a drug. It's considered similar to ephedrine, and it stimulates beta 2 receptors as a beta 2 agonist. Now, the trick with Clen is that it allows you to burn stored body fat as energy more quickly. So remember on the last segment, Hamobster and I were talking about the way our body works when it comes to energy. Well, in this
Yes.
situation, let's say you're doing fasted cardio and it takes about 15 minutes for your body to burn through the excess glycogen. Just giving you an example. Well, Clen,
Yeah.
it's probably going to get there half as quick. So instead of taking 15, 20 minutes, it might take 5 or 10 minutes instead to
Yeah.
start hitting those energy receptors. So obviously, and they've done studies with rodents and stuff, the quicker, the more exercise you do on Clen, it's going to make basically it's going to make exercise harder because you're going to be more uncomfortable when you do exercise, but it's going to be doubly as effective when it comes to burning.
Yes.
So that's why you see pro bodybuilders that love Clen, because they're able to do their post workout cardio, and they can do less post workout cardio, less of a how do I put it? They're gonna do like elliptical or maybe walking on the treadmill versus doing more hardcore cardio, more hardcore 50 minutes of jogging versus just going on elliptical for 15 minutes. Well, you get just as much calorie burn and fat burn on from that 15 minutes of elliptical than you would going for a 40 or 50-minute jog. That's the idea. That's why it's kind of a cheat. It's basically a cheat. So
Yeah.
bodybuilders and celebrities, and I'll bring you in, Mobster, to talk about this. It seemed to reach popularity in the 90s and 2000s. I know that Britney Spears was open about using it. Other celebrities, pro bodybuilders, top level pro bodybuilders, we know from their protocols, even to this day, but especially back in those days, you would not see a protocol that didn't include Clen because it was such a good drug to add to their protocols. It's very, very important to use. So, Mobster, really quick touch on that type of thing back in the 90s and
Yeah,
2000s.
I mean, look, both those groups, although the bodybuilders are contributed to a lesser degree, it's about the money, right? If I'm Britney Spears, if I'm a top film star, if I'm a great singer, if I'm a top professional pro bodybuilder, it's about the goddamn money, Steve. And so I want to make sure that what I'm doing is as effective as it possibly can be. Do I want to do 6 hours of cardio without Clen or 3 hours of cardio with Clen? Well, motherfucker, I'm going to choose the 3 hours, obviously. What else do we see, Stephen? Not necessarily as we used to way back in the day when I was very young, the rubber suits and the plastic suits, but what we still see is top professional bodybuilders doing the stairmaster or whatever else with their big, heavy fucking gasp training tops and big, heavy gasp training bottoms. And this is literally the grind. I'm going to feel like shit, but I also want to feel sweaty. I want all this stuff. I almost want to be weighted down by the sweat on my clothing. And look, I use the film star thing again. I've said this before on the forums. I said if the idea of some film star getting up at 4 o'clock in the fucking morning, 2 hours before they need to do on set, with some sort of PT coming around to their house at 4:30 in the morning and kicking their ass for an hour and having a chef prepare the food comes down to $25 million contract. And for $25 million, Steve and I are going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and train like motherfuckers. Of course we are. Right now, what I don't want to be doing, as I said already, is in order to burn off my body fat at that level, especially for $25 million, I don't want to be getting up 3 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning just to do the time. And if it's super, super important, because I'm going to be down at the IMAX on the big motherfucking 100-foot screen, Steve, where you can see every lump and bump and spot and wart and line of my forehead and whatever, is why my ego alone demands that I do the fucking exercise and cut the fat and use whatever means necessary, which includes Clen, in order to get into shape, because you're going to be able to see every single thing, and especially pre-CGI and video manipulation. You are going to see what I look like. You're going to see whether I have a six pack. You're going to see whether I'm lean or fat or whatever else. And then the same thing on the red carpet, Steve, with those photographers and whatever else. But there is no CGI when it's right out there in your face, in public eyes, etc., etc. So it becomes incredibly important for the kind of multi-million-dollar film contracts, record contracts, or even $500,000 that the top professional bodybuilder might win this year in 2024. How important you are for those 5 minutes of on stage being judged for you to be in shape. So every single means necessary, short of doing yourself in, Steve, is going to be looked at and, if necessarily, utilized. And we have to understand the importance, what we can learn from that. Because we don't have to go crazy. We don't have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, Steve, but we can certainly learn that if a out of shape actor can get into shape in 3 months by doing every goddamn thing there is, by getting up early, by doing the cardio, by having great food, and the singer and the top professional bodybuilder training 16 weeks for the biggest show of the year, then we can apply some of those lessons. And some of those lessons will include, obviously, as we've said already, using Clen and using Anavar. I think the only issue, and I'll touch upon the Clen one again, Steve, and I've mentioned this on other shows, is that for the average Joe, and this is what I've seen for myself in person, the average Joe will not understand how they might feel on Clen. Anavar, by comparison, is not actually that bad, with the possible exception of the pumps doing cardio. But Clen can make you feel uncomfortable, and especially at the higher dosages. And for some people, if you have, and I've said this before on other shows, Steve, if you've got any issues with anxiety, using Clen can give you the symptomatic effects of though you're being anxious, specifically like a mild anxiety attack. And the idea that you're having what feels like a mild anxiety attack while you're sitting on a sofa watching TV of an evening can be a bit disconcerting. I think the other issue is, and I've said this before, Steve, that those individuals, when I've seen that, have not been putting the work in at the dining table and not been putting the work in
Yeah.
with the cardio. But otherwise, if you understand you're going to feel like that, for me, and I've said this on other shows as well, Steve, Hardcore might take the approach of, I can feel it fucking working. I know that this stuff is doing what it's supposed to be doing because I'm supposed to feel like this. And therefore, you could take that approach to say, as a positive point of view, I'm doing my cardio, I'm eating clean, and my clean is definitely working because this is how I'm supposed to fucking feel. My body's literally burning like a motherfucker. So, what do you think on that, Steve, before we
Yeah,
move
so
on?
the side effects on Clen can get very nasty, and I don't like them one bit. So shaky hands, heartburn, elevated heart rate, enlarged heart, which you're not going to notice, but if you got things tested, you notice your blood pressure is going to rise a lot. So really, you got to keep an eye on it. If things get too bad, you've got to lower the dose back down. I'm going to talk about the dosing in here in a second. Also, another thing you should be doing on Clen is you should be staying out of the heat. Don't get overheated. Don't excessively sweat. Make sure you're hydrating. But using taurine and electrolytes is also important because of the cramps. Now, obviously, one of the reasons people cramp up is dehydration. So Clen will dehydrate you. So you have to be drinking a lot of water. You have to take your taurine. You have to take your electrolytes. That's very important. So Euro Pharma, they come in 40 microgram per pill. And look, the proper way to use it would be starting at that 40 microgram, and then every few days you can increase it gradually.
Yeah.
And then your peak dose somewhere around 120 micrograms. Okay, I wouldn't go any higher than that. And then don't be shy about lowering the dose back down. You can lower it back down to 80 micrograms, or you can keep it at 120 depending on how you feel. So it just depends on the side effects. So a common protocol with Clen is 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. But
Yes.
some people who are experienced will run it longer, but you want to keep the dosage more low. I talked to some pro bodybuilders. That's the way they like to do it. They like to keep the dose lower, but run it longer, and they get more fat loss benefits from it going it that way. But it's a really, I don't like it, but some of you out there are going to love this stuff for fat burning. You're going to do really well on it. And some of you are going to absolutely hate it. So you got to experiment. And Euro Pharma has a really good Clen. Now, when it comes to Anavar, and I'll bring you in, Mobster, also to talk about Anavar. Now, let me give you the background on Anavar a little bit. So Anavar has been around since the 1960s. It was actually invented in 64, but it didn't peak popularity originally until the 80s and into the 90s. And part of the reason the popularity became so great is because it got hard to get a hold of because you had the big steroid ban that took effect during this time. So what happened is the price skyrocketed and people were very desperate to find it. So sources started to make fake Anavar where they would sell Winstrol as Anavar or T-Bol as Anavar or Dianabol as Anavar, and they would make big margins off of it. So one of the reasons the popularity in the first place was it was so good for fat loss and building lean muscle mass without having any estrogen problems and very little androgenic side effects. So Euro Pharma, they have excellent Anavar, and I know Mobster, you're a big fan of their products. Now dosing, let me give you my thoughts on dosing. I'll let Mobster give his thoughts. So for men, 20 to 50 milligrams a day. I've always got good results on 30 to 40 milligrams a day of it.
Mhm.
Females, 2.5 milligrams up to 10 milligrams. And then the length up to 8 weeks. You want to make sure you lose liver support because it is liver, it does have liver toxicity since it is 17 alpha alkylated, which is a good thing because it means it's going to absorb better. Mobster, give us your thoughts on your pharmacy Anavar.
Yeah, as regular listeners will know, I love Anavar, but specifically for strength and optimal dosage for me in terms of if I'm just running it solo or with very little any other PEDs on a particular stack. So, for example, my regular go-to now would be MK677 for the healing properties, slightly enhanced sleep, and so on and so forth, Steve. That would be on a daily basis. Just started TRT, as you know, so that arguably that would be on a daily basis. And if I was running Anavar quote unquote solo, ignoring the fact that I've just said I'm taking those other two things because they're part of my daily, every single day on or off cycle, then I would be looking at 50 milligrams. And for me, it's a guaranteed certain level of strength, providing I put the work in free going on cycle, and especially if the beginning of the cycle for strength is a little bit higher than it was the last time I ran a strength training cycle, or cycled my strength, or whatever you want to call it, before using PEDs, then I'm guaranteed in my mind, based on the previous experience, enhanced level of strength at the end of the cycle because I've used it before. I've known what I've got from an experience, and so on and so forth. In this set of circumstances, I actually agree with Steve. And especially if I was combining it with Clen, Steve, I would probably take the 40 microgram approach that Steve talks about in terms of the Clen and just see how I get on. I'd imagine I don't particularly like the idea of it. And again, I've seen people struggle with it. So I think if I was using Clen, I'd probably be looking at 60, 80 micrograms, and I just pushed to 120 just to see what the hell I was like. I can see me somewhere in the middle. And I would probably, as I am right now, ironically, as we do this show, I'm actually running Anavar with Dianabol, 30 milligrams a day of each for a thing. But if I was fat burning, Steve, the 20 to 40 milligrams of Anavar in combination with Clen for, as Steve said, 4 to 8 weeks makes a lot of sense to me. And that would be a perfect result. What I would do, Steve, was probably make some changes pre using any PED, so before the Clen and before the VAR. I would almost have a run up, if you like, in terms of my cardio and my diet, and then 8 weeks out, introduce both those two things into the cycle. The only issue, and I haven't had this for a long time, probably because I'm not doing that level of conditioning work, and also I suspect, Steve, for me, because I've been running it off and on for multiples of years. When I first ran Anavar, the pumps. Now, we've discussed this before. The Anavar pumps are kind of pleasant. Anavar pumps are not pleasant. They're uncomfortable, to say the least. They don't last forever, not all day long thing or whatever else. But I've told this story a bunch of times. I had Anavar made for me, 50 milligrams, perfect. Put on 5 pounds on cycle. My strength went up. Lovely. Thank you very much. But if I did anything repetitious, walking into town was the story that I've told before, and having to stop 3 times over a mile at normal walking pace because the shin pumps were horrendous. Showing one of our Asian pharmacy buddies, who was a local pharmacist and all over Gloucestershire, working in the pharmacies and chemists where the regular pharmacist was on holiday or ill or whatever else. And I showed him some kettlebell work. And two minutes in, I think it was a 16 or 8 kilo kettlebell, Steve, the back pumps were run. It's just like, you carry on, I'm going to sit over here because this pump is fucking, it was uncomfortable to say the least. The shin pumps were positively painful. So one of the issues can be, and again, it's dose dependent. It also comes down to experience. I don't get these issues now. I'm a lot heavier and a lot stronger, and yet I haven't had those issues for a long time. But for some people, and I still suspect the condition of the individual applies here, you might have those pumps. And if you do slightly higher volume, if you do slightly higher repetitious work, you might find that you're going to still have problems with those pumps. So one of the tricks is to use an organ protector type product, or which will contain taurine, or taurine. Low dose, you can find it quite easily on eBay, etc., as a supplement, and that seems to lower the effects of the pumps. I know that you've had Anavar pumps in painful ones in the past. Let's talk about your experience.
Yeah, and one of the things with Anavar pumps is it will affect your cardio negatively, and so will the Clen. So both of these really, if you like to do a lot of cardio, like long distance cardio, they're not good options for those reasons. So even with the taurine, even with the electrolytes, even with hydrating, you're still going to have the pumps regardless. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you're someone who loves cardio, you might want to take a look at some of our other podcasts on some of these other compounds that we talk about. That would be a better option. But if you don't mind doing like short cardio, 15, 20-minute cardio, maybe high intensity cardio and be done with it, then these would be great options for you. So
Let
it's
me cover
something,
that a
yeah,
little bit
yeah.
more, Steve.
All right,
Sorry, just
really
briefly.
quick,
One
yeah.
of the things that people sometimes don't understand about exercise, specifically cardio, and I'm going to use the phrase thermogenesis. Um, there is science to back up the simple idea that when we train, and I'm just talking about weight training in the gym, bodybuilding, call it what you will, never mind cardio, you have a small but significant metabolic effect, i.e., an increase in the amount of calories that you're utilizing, the amount of slightly elevated body temperature, and so on and so forth. Anavar and Clen will, of course, enhance that, and it lasts for hours. So if you do the fasted cardio that Steve talked about, let's say you do this before you go to work or school, college, whatever, in the morning, 7 o'clock, fasted cardio. You go out, you get your steps, you make sure you're out of breath. And the whole goddamn thing lasts half an hour, 45 minutes. You have a slight elevation based on your exercise at that time in the morning, whether it's weight training in the gym or cardiovascular, with the Clen and the Anavar to enhance the effects again for about 3 hours, slightly above where you would be baseline if you didn't do the fasted cardio, if you hadn't taken those two products as well. So that's an idea that you need to get your head around. So the idea, as we said, even if the Clen makes it uncomfortable, if the Anavar makes the pumps horrendous, the simple fact that you did these things with Clen and with Anavar will still be enhanced for, even if it's only half an hour instead of an hour, because of the pumps being so goddamn uncomfortable, because Clen makes you feel horrible, it will still be enhanced for 2-3 hours. Some individuals, I think, up to 4 hours in certain examples. And again, it depends on the intensity and level of conditioning work, etc., that you're doing. But keep that in mind. In other words, you're starting the day well, you're doing it without food in your system, and you are going to stay, quote unquote, in that fat burning thing for a lot longer than you think. Obviously, the majority is right at the beginning, but that little bit of a percentage here and a little bit of a percentage there over the next 2 to 3 hours is going to add up if you're consistently doing this kind of stuff on a regular basis. And of course, you're keeping that stuff going with nutrition, etc., for the day. And another thing, Steve, might be just hitting the gym in the morning and then doing some sort of cardio in the afternoon. So you're not only started the gym work in the morning and had a small metabolic effect, because weight training is less cardiovascular or cardio impacting than cardio in and of itself, but then adding cardio later on in the day rather than doing them both up the front, just to give you an idea of what you can do for your body in terms of how your body is going to respond and so on. Move on to the next portion, Steve.
So let me give you some fat burning stack options, and then Mobster can give one or two that he likes. So let me talk about using them together. So you can stack both Clen and Anavar together. Wow, the pumps are going to be amazing. You want to make sure you're using your support supplements and using taurine with it, obviously. But in this example, what you would do is do the 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off protocol that I talked about earlier with the Clen, while also using the Anavar along with it for 8 weeks. So you basically start them together, and then after 2 weeks, you'd stop the Clen, but you'd keep the Anavar going. You see what I'm saying? And then after another 2 weeks, you get back on the Clen, but you also keep the Anavar going the whole way. And that would be the way you can stack them both together. Now, if you want to take them separately, look, it's a great cutting stack for a beginner, going with Primobolan 500 milligrams a week, and then you can do the Anavar about 30 milligrams a day. That's a great cutting stack right there. Now, a lot of experienced users have used Anavar and Euro-Pharmacy Trend, which is tremendous, and they can cut them up a lot together. So in that example, you would go with Trend. I'd go a lower dose with the Trend, 200 to 250 milligrams a week, and then you'd run the Anavar somewhere around 30 or 40 milligrams a day, and that's a really, really good stack together. I would not use Clen with Trend. And I know a lot of pro bodybuilders do that, but the side effects are just too much. So I would use Clen. It's going to be an option to stack it with mild fat burners. You can go. Euro-Pharmacies has many mild fat. Has many mild steroid options. T-Bowl, Primo, as I talked about, Equipoise or low dose testosterone would be much better options. You don't want to use Clen with anything harsh. So don't use it with Anadrol, don't use it with Tren, don't use it with Superdrol. Just too fucking harsh. Even Winstrol, I think, would be too harsh with the Clen. So those would be the way I stack them up. So why don't you give one or two examples of how you would stack?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at one of their products here, Steve. They've actually got a Anavar and Winstrol summer cutting cycle, which is what it's called, and it's got the Anavars at 30 milligrams and the Winstrol in the form of stanozol or stanozolo, should I say, 20 milligrams. So they've actually prepared a product for you, and in that particular situation, Steve, I would run it again because it's an oral product. We've had disputes or disagreements over running orals for short periods of time versus longer periods of time. But again, I still think 8 weeks here would be absolutely perfect in my mind. And again, that's a fixed dose per day. That would be one pill, 50 milligrams per day, which is 350 milligrams total per week for the two drugs combined. And again, they've done all the work for you. One thing I will say, and I think this applies to any of these cycles and dosing suggestions that Steve and I have, is do not leave it to the last minute. Do not wait until you've got 4 weeks or 6 weeks to go for the holiday. I want you kind of cleaning your diet up and doing your cardio pre any PEDs, about 12 weeks, 16 weeks out, Steve. And then with 8 weeks, maybe a little bit longer to go, that's when you bring the PED. So you are quote unquote peaking in the same way that a competing bodybuilder would for the day or the first day of your holiday. So the last time you use anything should probably be on the Friday. And I want you arriving in in Vegas on the tropical island, wherever the fuck it is that you're going, on the Sunday or on the Monday, in shape and ready to rock and roll. Another approach, and Steve actually mentioned one of these, and I think this would be a great choice in terms of enhancing your cardiovascular ability. And again, we are looking and probably looking, you're still using Clen, you're still using Anavar. So one of the approaches that Steve's already mentioned is T-Bolt. T-Bolt was actually specifically designed to enhance the athletic ability of the athletes that it was created for, the East Germans, and of course now being used by other people. So it's actually going to mean any impact on your cardiovascular ability. And as Steve said, Clen and Anavar can make that uncomfortable, will be somewhat negated by those two. So adding something which begins to enhance it, or at least takes some of the negated effects away, makes a lot of sense to me. And especially if we combine that, as Steve mentioned also, in using Trend, would be a great composition. So for example, Steve, using Clen or Anavar and T-Bolt and maybe Winstrol against Steve. So for example, T-Bolt or Anavar at 20 to 30 milligrams a day, again, 4, 6, 8 weeks, and Winstrol at 50 milligrams a day, keeping that option in there pretty much the same consistently throughout. I mean, there's a bunch of options here, Steve. People talk about using some sort of testosterone on cycle. And then obviously, again, you're looking at using the Clen with testosterone. And again, we should look at maybe competing bodybuilders. Think of the way that a competing bodybuilder gets everything together. Now, their stacks and cycles will tend to be bigger and run longer. But I've broken it down thus, Steve. And if we allow 12 weeks, although I'd actually think most competing bodybuilders run a 16-week approach to getting in shape for a competition, you're looking at something like stage 1 is coming off your bulk. In other words, just adding muscle and size, etc. in the wintertime, off season, call it what you will. And then some element of that is still mass gaining process as they go into their cycles. So the drugs at the beginning there will be obviously bulkers. The middle part of their stack cycle approach to competition tends to be towards the cleaning up of the diet, taking out certain drugs, especially the ones that hold more water retention, but at the same time, not looking to cut down too much, but they like to see the lines between the muscles, but we're not seeing muscular striations. And then the last 4, 6 weeks, it's probably the last 4 weeks, Steve, and you're starting to see this now with people approaching the Mr. Olympia competition as we record this show, where you are starting to see separation. You're starting to see lines appear. You're certainly starting to see veins appear. And those drugs tend to be much shorter esters. The Clen approach, the Anavar approach that we've already talked about, even the T-Bolt approach, and certainly the Trend will be in there. And the longer acting esters, the cypionates, all those kind of drugs will be out. The Dianabol will be out. All of the buggers, the sustanolone will be out in those last 4 to 6 weeks. But all they're looking to do there, Steve, is keep muscle on, which makes a lot of sense. Get the separation comes to another level, muscles start to look 3D, and the lines, when they flex, you'll start to see statuesque looks on unflex, and then when they flex, stuff starts to fucking pop. You'll start to see different muscle fibers and different separations just in the chest muscle alone, Steve, with all 3 heads of the delt start to shine, and you'll start to see lines on the outside of the tricep. And again, this depends on the listener, on their approach. But what are you looking at here? You're looking at a longer approach to getting into shape. You're looking to hold onto muscle tissue, and you're only looking to really shine, go hardcore, do the higher dosages, for example, of Clen that we talked about in the latter stages. And it all comes down to, Steve, I think ultimately anything that we're talking about, whether it's muscle building or fat loss, just what approach the listener wants to take. What can they learn from bodybuilders, that 3-stage approach? And using the harsher drugs towards the end, being uncomfortable for shorter periods of time, but getting every single motherfucking thing to shine. So I would probably include in the stacks and cycle suggestions that you and I talked about. That's when I would ramp up my cardio. That's when I would try to get another 5, 10, 15 minutes a day, regardless of how I felt on the Clen and the Anavar. That's when I would definitely be setting my alarm clock for half an hour early in the morning. That's when there would be no junk food in the house. How much do I want to look in shape? How goddamn ripped do I want to be for a holiday? How lean for that photo shoot? Or even just a bet I've had with a buddy for a case of beer. How hardcore do I want to go? What do you think on that approach, Steve? That sort of three-stage approach, and how much the listener wants to push it to get into shape?
Yeah, and flexibility is important, and don't be scared to be flexible on this because both of these, they're orals and they have shorter esters. They're not like taking uh esters that take that slow release into the body, long injectable esters. So these are in and out of your system quicker. So you can be more flexible with these. Like if you're on Clen and you don't feel well on it and you're like, yeah, this ain't working for me, then just stop taking it. I mean, you don't have to. You don't have to force yourself to take it. It's not like what we talked about earlier, where you're being uncomfortable because yeah, I'm addicted to sugar, I'm addicted to carbs or something. And it's hard. Oh, I'm uncomfortable. There's a difference. There's a difference between my blood pressure just got jacked up 25 points and my heart rate is up 20 points. When my resting heart rate's up 20 points, it went from being at 70 to 90 or 100. There's a difference. You've got to monitor your body and know the differences in the body. And if something is wrong, you need to change course. So don't be afraid to do that. So it's very, very important to be flexible. That's one of the advantages of using a stack like this. So, Mobster, we have a few minutes left. Why don't you go on talk about why don't you talk about
Euro
Euro Pharma
Pharmacies, yeah.
and why you love them?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, look, I'm on their page right now as we're doing this show, guys. And one of the things I said to Steve in the pre-show, looking at the Euro Pharmacies actual website, is they've updated it recently to include all, and I'm on the orals page, all of the new oral look sachets. And one of the things I've just discussed in other shows, and part of the reason why let's start with that, Steve. I like Euro Pharmacies. I use their products on a regular basis. I've tried other approved sources, and they're great, Steve. Absolutely. But why is Euro Pharmacies my go-to? Well, this is an example, Steve. They have upgraded and designed a new look just to the oral products. We've looked at the injectables in a recent show, and we talked about the 15 ml vials, and I said, what are they doing? They're not sitting on their laurels. They're not going, oh, we've got a great product, we've got great customer service. You don't need to change fuck all. And this is an approach that you see in all of the better companies. Apple has multiple phones. What is it now? The iPhone 15, I think, or the iPhone 15X. They don't have an Apple iPhone 1. They have 15, in fact, more than 15 iterations of their best-selling products. Same thing with the Apple Mac. Same thing with any car that we talked about. I love sports cars. I can't drive, but I read Top Gear magazine. And none of the companies have said, oh, we're not going to design a new petrol engine car because everybody's going electric. There's fucking 1,500 horsepower fucking Bugattis coming out. There's the latest thing that can only be used on a track. And what are we talking about in that regards? We're saying that no company that's successful doesn't try to upgrade or push their company into a better direction than it's already got. Arguably, Euro-Pharmacies, I think Steve said on another show, and I'm going to agree with this, is one of the top 3 companies in the world. It is seen on multiple brand reseller type companies. I'm thinking of probably the number 1 brand reseller has Euro-Pharmacies on their product list. Why? Because it's innovative. Because, for example, they push their products in a new direction with the 15 ml vials. Because they're redesigning an even cleaner look. And I've got some of the old product as well as the new products here as we do this show. A even cleaner, more medicated, more better designed, more graphically superior look to the product that they've had before. Why, for example, I believe, Steve, they used to do a 25 milligram version of the Anavar. Why have they got the 10s? Arguably because it suits both the men and the women. It's a lot easier to split a 10 milligram pill than a 50 milligram pill or a 25 milligram pill, as they used to produce for the women, for example. Why are they out there? Their customer service. All of the best companies that we talk about on the shows have great customer service. Euro Pharmacy's customer service is fucking right up there, Steve. Absolutely. Their reps are amongst arguably one I'm thinking of specifically is probably the best rep. Deals with stuff that I don't have to deal with on a regular basis. I talked about one issue that the company had using an outside source to manufacture one product. And there was an issue with the quality. Literally, the milligrams per mil weren't what they were supposed to have been. And they resolved this with customers, all of their customers that had brought a batch within 72 hours. That's fucking shit hot, Steve. That's outstanding in the industry. And another thing that I've talked about on his shows on a regular basis is you go, okay, how long's a company been around? Euro-Pharmacies is 20 years plus. You do not, I don't care what you're selling, whether it's fucking shoes, Coca-Cola, iPhones, or PEDs. You do not last for 20 years in any industry if you don't know what the fuck you're doing, if you're not innovative, if you're not out there, if your reputation in this situation isn't tip top. What do you think about Euro-Pharmacies, Steve, before we finish the show?
Yeah, and I talked about earlier the Anavar, how hard it was to get back in the day. Also, it was extremely expensive, Mobster. In those times, you had to be rich to be able to get Anavar. And now you can go and buy from your pharmacies. Anybody can buy. So we're very lucky today to have brands like Euro Pharma that provide these these steroids for an
Yep.
affordable price where we can afford them. Mobster and I can afford them. Back then, Mobster and I would not be able to afford Anavar. It'd be way too expensive.
Oh God, Steve, on a milligram per milliliter basis of the injectables, on a milligram per pill basis for the orals, and this applies to the whole industry, but specifically to Euro-Pharmacies in this example, you've never had it so good, motherfuckers. The price is probably the same as it's been going back in the day when we had less dollars and less pounds to spend. The price has probably been that way for a very long period of time, which means on a milligram per pill basis, you're actually paying the least you paid ever for just the Anavar as an example, guys. Listen, come on the forums, discuss in the click below and post in the comments about your fat burning journey, specifically your experience with Clen and Anavar. Let us know if we missed anything out that you want to fucking hear about. Please note, as always, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.